consider the reasons why the land was being acquired in the national interest. And the reason I say that is because the state has so far not produced any evidence, report, statement of reasons, which shows the reasons why the land was acquired. And this is fundamental to every single compulsory purchase order that was made by the state. It is not for me, it is not for the Commission to decide what the national interest is. It is actually for those people who made that decision to set out the reasons why they think it's in the national interest. Something is in the national interest if you acquire a piece of land for a purpose that would benefit the whole of the nation, the whole of the people of Seychelles. Failure to set this out means that the state has acted ultra vires. And I'll give you an example of, for example, how the state can come up with a national interest. For example, if, you want to acquire a piece of land to build a school on, which will be attended by the school children of the Seychelles and benefit the whole of the people of Seychelles, that's a good reason. But there is no reason whatsoever set out for the acquisition of parcel C1747. So the state has failed.
Just because you're a lawyer, I wanted to take advantage of you. Can I ask you, they had a policy about absentee land owners, and if you were absent from Seychelles, they had a policy that they would take your property because you were taking money out of Seychelles away from the people. So they would acquire these properties saying, we're going to give them to needy Seychellois families and keep the money in Seychelles. What do you think about that policy as being in the national interest?
Well, it's not in the national interest because how can it be? First of all, the money that's taken out is money that belongs to a person privately. So you have money in the bank. It doesn't belong to the state. It doesn't belong to anybody other than myself. And this is an attitude that seems to prevail quite recently. For example, I came across during the pandemic when the National Bank, I think it's called, was saying that there was a deficit in foreign exchange and asking people to be careful about it. And some people were turning around saying, why don't we just seize people's bank accounts, and those who got foreign exchange money, we can just seize those. But the argument is that, well, that money doesn't belong to anybody other than the person to whom it belongs to. It's private property. And in any event, how can me deciding to take my money out of the Seychelles and going off to live abroad is causing an issue that's going to affect the whole of the people of Seychelles? I'm not the one who's managing the economy. Managing the economy is a matter for the government. It's a matter of policies. You'll have an economic policy, an environment policy, a planning policy, a tourism policy, a fishing policy. That's the way government are run. And it's you, the state and the civil servants and the ministries to come up with strategies in order to implement those policies. You cannot on the one hand have a policy of deporting people and then at the same time saying, well, we're going to punish them if they take their money out. It's crazy.
But that was that was the policy.
Yeah, but it doesn't make it just. And I think what it does, in fact, when I come to read the Human Rights Declaration of Human Rights, it's a clear breach. So I'll now move on to paragraph 11. On the 31st of May, 1991, the government transferred parcel C1747 to Mr. and Mrs. Nouris for a sum of 80,000 rupees. No reason has been given as to why the land was compulsorily acquired other than to state that it was in the national interest, or why it was subsequently transferred to Mr. Nouris without it reverting back to the original owner. The second house, located on parcel C1747, was a substantial property. It consisted of 4 bedrooms, separate kitchen, bathroom, sitting room and veranda, with easy access to the public highway and the beach. On the 18th of January 2006, Marie-Thérèse Green wrote to the President's office asking about compensation for the acquisition. This matter was referred to Special Advisor Raymond Chantave, and a sum of 160,000 rupees less 80,000 rupees paid to the bank was offered as compensation. This meant that the heirs would receive a sum of 80,000 rupees. So this was refused. And at that stage, I think it was quite clear that the state was just playing a bit of gamemanship here and was not really taking it seriously in dealing with this issue. There have been numerous correspondence on this matter between Mrs. Green, myself, and Mr. Chantave. A number of issues have been raised with him, in which Mr. Chantave has been unable to resolve or provide a response to. These are: why the land was compulsorily acquired in the first place, why the land was subsequently sold to Mr. Nouris and not returned to the heirs. When land is compulsorily acquired, compensation must be paid for the land. Is the compensation on offer based on open market value in 1979 when the land was acquired? If it is, how was this valuation arrived at? Where is the authority within the legislation that allowed the department to decide how that value is arrived at? As a result of the acquisition of parcel C1747, parcel C1746 has been left landlocked. Previously, access was across both C1748 and C1747. With parcel C1747 being fenced off, there is now no formal right of access to parcel C1746. And therefore, the government must therefore grant a right of way across its adjacent land to and from the nearest public highway. I made specific inquiry of Mr. Chantave to find out the reason why the property had been acquired. He was unable to provide me with an answer. In a letter dated the 16th of September 2008 addressed to Mrs. Green, Mr. Chantave stated that what is in the national interest was a matter for the court to decide, which we just discussed on. This raises a fundamental question about the term national interest, what that means. Based on Mr. Chantave's response, it is clear that officers were not clear as to its true meaning, and therefore the basis on which compulsory acquisitions were being carried out. It is also clear from Mr. Shangtav's response that there was no good reason for the acquisition of parcels C1747, otherwise he would have stated that they were. Certainly, it would appear to have failed the test that the acquisition should be in the national interest, whatever that means. It certainly fails the test if the reason and purpose of the acquisition cannot be given, or if indeed it was purely a political reason. Mr. Shangtav had been informed by Mrs. Green she would be prepared to accept either the return of parcel C1747 or another plot in lieu of the compensation due. This would allow her to rebuild her home, which she would have inherited, but for the acquisition. On the 15th of September 2008, Mrs. Green had a meeting with Mr. Shangtav and was told that the offer of 80,000 rupees, subsequently confirmed by letter, would not be increased, and that the other matters should be resolved through the courts. It was clear that at that stage, Mr. Shangtav was not taking the issue seriously, despite the statutory requirements contained in Part 3, Section 14 of the Seychelles Constitution. So if I may refer the Commission to Part 3 of the Constitution. And I must say, it's not the best drafted piece of legislation I've ever come across. But what it says in paragraph 4(1), the state undertakes. Therefore, it's a legal undertaking being given by the state. There should not be any breaking of that undertaking. Breaking of the undertaking means a breach of the Constitution. If I, as a lawyer, give an undertaking to the court and I break that undertaking, I'd be in contempt of court and I'd be sent to prison. Plus, I'll also be struck off. So the state undertakes to continue to consider all applications, not one, two, or a few, all of them, made during the period of 12 months from the date of coming into force of this Constitution by a person whose land was compulsorily acquired under the Lands Act, Acquisition Act 1977, during the period starting of June 1977 and ending on the date of coming into force of this Constitution, and to negotiate in good faith, no prevarication, you act properly, not trickery, pokery, when you're dealing with this, with a view to where on the date of the receipt of the application the land has not been developed, or there is no government plan to develop it, transferring back the land to the person. So there's two conditions here that the Commission needs to look at. The first one, it says the land has not been developed. So if the land has not been developed, then it has to be transferred. The second condition is where the government has no plans to develop it. This is the second limb. the government also has to transfer the land back. And then we come to paragraph B. See, where there is a government plan to develop the land, and the person from whom the land has acquired satisfies the government that person will implement those plans, or a similar plan transferring the land back to that person. So this is a third category of land where there is a plan to develop it. And then we come to C. Which then deals with where the land cannot be transferred back under subparagraph A or subparagraph B. That is, where the land cannot be transferred back because A, the land has been developed by the government, or 2, in B, where the government has a plan to develop the land. Then C kicks in. Because it says that where the land cannot be transferred back, and says subparagraph A or subparagraph B, as full compensation for the land acquired, transferring to the person another parcel of corresponding land to the land acquired. And I'll point out to the Commission that there is no or after that. Then you come to 2, Roman 2, paying the person full monetary compensation to the land acquired. So Roman 1 and Roman 2 are together. You pay full compensation, and you also transfer the land back. And then we come to little 3, because after Roman 2, there's an or there. So that gives the government a choice. As full compensation for the land acquired, devising a scheme of compensation, which I don't know whether the government has. So when you look at the interpretation, and I go back specifically to parcel C1747, this was a piece of land that has a tenant in situ sitting on it. There was no plan to develop it. The government hasn't developed it. All they did was transfer it to Mr. Noyce. The Constitution is clear. Transfer the land back. How the government goes about getting the land back, that's a matter for the state. And I would suggest to the state, this is where you should be using your compulsory purchase powers if you cannot acquire it by private treaty. Because the Constitution gives you that power to do so. Because you're complying with what the Constitution is saying to you, you need to do. And then we come to the value of the land in subsection 2, for the purpose of subparagraph 1, says the value of the land acquired shall be the market value of the land at the time of coming into force of this Constitution. So it's not at the time when the land was acquired by the state, but rather at the time when the Constitution came into force. And the market value, we all know what that means. It means a value that a willing purchaser is willing to pay between him and a willing seller on the open market without any encumbrances. It's a free negotiation. Normally what you happen when you're dealing with compulsory purchase in the UK here, there are some premises. Compulsory purchase powers are draconian pieces of legislation because they actually breaches human rights. So it's a secondary, it's a power that you can only use as a last resort. So what you need to do first, if the state wants to acquire that piece of land, you need to go and try and buy that piece of land by private treaty, by negotiation first on the open market with that seller. And you will only then use the compulsory purchase powers when you are unable to do so. And when you are exercising that power, you need to decide, and in the UK, you don't have just one piece of legislation. We have the Land Acquisition Act, which sets out the procedure. We have the Land Compensation Act, which sets out the compensation. But these are secondary legislation. You cannot use it on its own. So on top of it, you then have specific legislation which gives you powers to acquire compulsorily land for a specific purpose. And when you do that, you need to set out in a statement of reasons why you're acquiring that piece of land. And also you need to consider human rights implications and equitable stuff in terms of dealing with how it's going to affect people from ethnic minorities and so on. And when you're acquiring that property, the premise is to put that person from whom you're acquiring that property in a situation that he would have been had that acquisition not take place. In other words, you provide him with enough compensation so that he does not actually suffer any losses. And it's not just payment of open market value of the property. And usually that is decided between two valuers, both paid for by the acquiring authority, who then go and agree a price. And if you cannot agree it, you then take the matter to the lands tribunal, who then decide what that price is going to be. But on top of that, you pay them statutory compensation. For example, you are entitled to 7.5% currently of the market value of your price as statutory compensation. You also get other compensation like disturbance payment for you having to move. You get payments for loss of earnings and investments. You get your statutory payments in terms of legal fees, surveyor's fees. So everything is paid for by the state.
Ask, one of the issues that has arisen in some of our cases is the government says if you didn't file within the 1 year period under the Constitution, you missed out on that request for review. We can't consider it. What do you think about that? Because you filed after that 1 year.
No, I think from what I can understand, there was a file before then, but yeah. Bernard Georges, I thought, had
so he filed within the time frame.
Yeah, okay. That's what I understood happened. And I think that's the reason why when we went, when I had the meeting, the state accepted that. And, you know, by both President Michel and President Faure making a decision on this, and my argument in any event would be that the state cannot now go back and say, well, it doesn't apply. So on the 6th of January, in paragraph 19 of 2008, I had a meeting with Mr. Paul Adam, the then Principal Secretary in the President's office. And on the 9th of January, I also had a meeting with Mr. Christian Leone, the then Principal Secretary in the Lands Department, to try and resolve these issues around parcel C1747. Following some further prevarication, I was informed on the 24th of April 2013, that is 5 years, that the government was willing to offer an alternative piece of land at Sweetescot. Mrs. Green came down from the UK to inspect the land on offer. However, that piece was rejected, as it was unsuitable for the reasons set out in the copy letter, which is dated the 12th of July 2013, marked SGU 11. And I'll invite the Commission to read that letter. My mother, when she came down, she was unable to even see where it was with the person from the Lands Department. All he could do was say it's up there somewhere amongst the bushes and the trees. So there was then a further prevarication on the part of the Lands Department. And on the 11th of May 2018, so another 5 years had elapsed, I again had to write to President Ford this time with another change of president, requesting the return of parcel C1747 or an alternative piece of land. On the 6th of May 2019, I received a letter from Mrs. B. Boniface stating that a piece of land was on offer at Ile Persévérance. I then requested further details and found that the piece of land was only 300 square meters. This offer was unacceptable on the basis that it was not an adequate offer, as parcel C1747 was 841 square meters, whereas the one on offer was 300 square meters. And there's copies of these correspondence are set out in SGU 12. This is akin to a burglar entering your house, takes all of your belongings, and then coming back and saying to you, I'll give some of it back to you. In fact, I'll give you 30%, but I'll keep 70%. How does the government actually think that this is acceptable? I believe that there have been serious breaches of human rights of both Mr. Salmon users and the heirs of Mrs. Green by the Republic of Seychelles. The United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, of which the Republic of Seychelles is a member state, sets out, and I'll take the Commission over some of these rights. And I think it's important because I think people in Seychelles do not actually understand what human rights are. I heard someone on SBC, I think he was from the Human Rights Commission. I think the Seychelles has a Human Rights Commission. And I know that the new constitution has some of those rights in there. He was asked the question, what is human rights? He says, human rights means you treat someone the same way you would like to be treated. This is not actually correct, because human rights is not a subjective thing. In fact, it's the reverse, it's objective. How people like to be treated is different. I may like being treated one way, somebody else likes to be treated another way. And this is what human rights try to do, is to square the circle. And human rights is just not one package. It's actually a series of rights, each defining what those rights are. And these are rights which people have as a human being. So if I may, Article 1 says, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Article 2. Everyone is entitled to the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. So discriminating against people because of their political belief is a breach. Discriminating against people because of their faith is a breach. Discriminating against people because of their sexual orientation is a breach. Article 3. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. This means that the state has the right to protect its citizen. That is the contract that the state has with its citizens contained in the Constitution. The state and a dictator does not have the right to decide who lives in the Seychelles or not. It is the Constitution that says who lives here. It is the people of Seychelles, people born and people who comes to live in the Seychelles, which the Constitution says is entitled to call himself a citizen of the Seychelles. So by deporting people and giving letters to people and saying, I cannot provide you with security, you should consider your situation here. It's basically exerting pressure on them to leave is a breach. Article 4. No one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all forms. Article 5. No one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Incarcerating people without reading them what their rights are, without a lawyer being there, subjecting them to inhumane treatment is a breach. Everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. So if somebody breaches the law and I go to the police station, I report that person, that breach or that offense, I would expect the police officer to take action. When I go to the judiciary and I bring in a case, I expect the judge to be impartial. We don't want to see judges sitting on the bench that have been selected by a dictatorship in order to carry out what the dictatorship is telling it to do. It should be implementing the law impartially and in accordance to the interpretation that it should be given. Because when you go before the court, justice must not only be done, it must be seen to be done. And you cannot have, therefore, sitting on the bench, judges being party members of a one-party state and expect the people to have confidence in the judiciary. All are equal before the law and are entitled, without any discrimination, to equal protection of the law. All are entitled to equal protection against any discrimination in violation of this declaration and against any incitement to such discrimination. Everyone has the right to an effective remedy by the competent national tribunals for acts violating the fundamental rights granted to him by the Constitution or by the law. No one, in Article 9, shall be subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile. I go back to my point. Arresting people on suspicion just because you feel like it, without any good cause, holding them arbitrarily for long periods of time, without setting out quite clearly in the law how long the detention should be, without knowing when they'll be released. It's only at the whim of a person, or sending people into exile forcibly, is a breach. Article 10. Everyone is entitled in full equality to a fair and public hearing by an independent and impartial tribunal in the determination of his rights and obligations and of any criminal charge against him. And I refer back to my submission on the judiciary in the Seychelles. Article 11. Everyone charged with a penal offence has the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty according to law in a public trial at which he has had all the guarantees necessary to his defence. Prejudging people, making presumption that they are guilty without them having been charged. And it's interesting, and I'll point out to the Commission this point. There have been very few cases, if at all, of people who've been detained by the regime, of anyone being brought before the courts and being found guilty and being sent to prison. And I'll rest my case on that point. So Article 12. No one shall be the subject of arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to attacks upon his honor and reputation. Everyone has the right to the protection of the law against such interference or attacks. Article 13. Everyone has the right to freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state. Everyone has the right to leave any country, including his own, and to return to his country. Sending people into exile and not being able to return back, which is the consequences of political asylum, is a breach of that article. Article 15. Everyone has the right to a nationality. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his nationality, nor denied the right to change his nationality. So everyone who's been deprived a passport, who goes to the immigration office in the Seychelles and says, I want a passport, and who's been denied that passport when they know they are entitled to it because the Constitution says you are, then it is a breach of human rights. Article 17. Everyone has the right to own property alone as well as in association with others. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his property. Compulsory acquisition of property, confiscation of property, which is what actually the order signed by Jacques Audoux, who later was sitting on the bench, is a breach of this article. Because that order was a confiscation order rather than a compulsory purchase order, the way we see it, for example, in the UK. Article 18. Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief and freedom, either alone or in community with others, or in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, private practice, worship, or observance. Article 19. Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. The right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impact information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. So people may talk freely as they should. People should be able to engage in dialogue. They should be able to express their opinion. If they see that the system doesn't work, they should be able to say that. Article 20. Everyone has the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and association. No one may be compelled to belong to an association. So trying to force people to join the SPPF was in breach of that article. Preventing people from joining any other political party is a breach of human rights. Article 21. Everyone has the right to take part in the government of his country, directly or indirectly, through a freely chosen representative. Having an election with a one-party state where you only have one candidate on it is a breach of the human rights. And everyone has the right to equal access to public service in this country, in his country rather. The will of the people shall be the basis for the authority of government. This will shall be expressed in periodic and genuine elections, which shall be universal and equal suffrage, and shall be held by secret vote or by equivalent free voting procedures. So we know that the political system in the Seychelles, after the coup, the setup of the one-party state, was a breach of human rights because you do not have freedom of expression, free elections. Article 23. Everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and to protection against unemployment. Everyone, without any discrimination, has the right to equal pay for equal work. Everyone who works has the right to just and favorable remuneration, ensuring for himself and his family an existence worthy of human dignity and supplemented, if necessary, by other means of social protection. Everyone has the right to form and to join a trade union for the protection of his interests. So preventing people from having jobs, blacklisting people, is a breach of human rights. Article 25. Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and his family, including food, clothing, housing, medical care, and necessary social services, the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or the lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. Motherhood and childhood are entitled to special care and assistance. All children, whether born in or out of wedlock, shall enjoy the same protection. So this policy of preventing people from having a job, from depriving them of their assets, is a policy of pushing people into poverty. It's a deliberate policy. And the reason that is done is to keep people subservient, so you can keep control of them. And again, it's a breach of human rights. And I'll come to the last one, which is just to say that and nothing in this declaration shall be interpreted as implying for any state, group, or person any right to engage in any activity or to perform any act aimed at the destruction of any of the rights and the freedoms set forth in this declaration. So, members of the Commission, I'm aware that this declaration may not be regarded as being part of the domestic law as far as the state is concerned. But the argument is that they are part of international law. And it is the norm to which the Seychelles government should behave toward its citizens, especially during the dictatorship period. And there's still a long way to go. In addition, it is clear that the state is also in breach of natural justice in the way it went about acquiring land. The Seychelles government, at the time of the acquisition of parcel C1747, appears to have had a land grab policy, especially against those who were seen as being against the state. Part of the doctrine of you were either with us or not with us. Natural justice refers to the basic fundamental principles of fair treatment. These principles include the duty to give someone a fair hearing, the duty to ensure that the matter is decided by someone who's impartial, and the duty to allow an appeal against a decision. So the process for doing the compulsory purchase order, the process of giving people notices, the process of not giving people the ability to challenge that notice, the process of not giving people the ability to refer the matter to a court for a judicial review of that decision, breaches natural justice. So the compulsory purchase legislation is actually a draconian piece of legislation. And the way compulsory purchases were carried out breaches those principles, because they failed to notify Mr. Users, they failed to notify Mrs. Green, the administrator of the acquisition. In fact, if anything, they sent the notice to Valerian Green, my grandmother, who was already there by then, and they knew that. Had they gone and looked at the register for death, they would have found out. And that is the end of my statement.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Uzis. And thank you for setting out the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I agree with you. I don't think the people of Seychelles really understand what rights they had under international law during the one-party state. But in our determinations, we are considering and applying the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to the breaches that have been alleged. I mean, one question. So since 2019, there's been no further correspondence with you about the land?
No.
No. And when you first made your application, did they tell you they had a lot of applications, and because they paid you some compensation, because they paid the bank mortgage, you were not going to be given priority? Or do you recall anything like that?
No, there was nothing. In fact, when they came back to me the first time, they said they just didn't have any land, and I think they just stayed quiet. It's only after chasing they then came back and said, well, we haven't got any land and here is some money, which was derisory, really. And as a result, I just went back to them and said, if you want to play that game with me, then I too can play that game. So I went back and with a revised offer, setting out, I think the claim came to about 5 million or something, rupees, something like that. But it was really to try and attract them into a conversation to get the dialogue going.
No, one of the things that strikes me often is the good faith, the good faith negotiation under the Constitution. We're now in 2021, and it's not just you that's still trying to, there's many people still trying to negotiate under those provisions. I mean, it's how many years? 28 years. It's
unacceptable.
No, I agree with you. It's completely unacceptable, and any notion of good faith, I think, has been lost given that passage of time. I know Mr. LeBlash has often told us they had so many cases, but once you make a commitment, I think you needed to make sure that you could bolster your resources and deal with them in an expeditious way. I mean, I think it's unconscionable that people are still waiting after all this time. And your father, he's passed, so he's not going to know whether or not there was any justice done in his case at the end of the day, which is also very sad, I think. We don't have the land file yet. Have we requested it, Mr. Investigator Man? No. Okay, so we'll request the land file. We will call Mr. LeBlash to address this case. When your father was imprisoned, did anyone try and communicate with Amnesty International or anyone about his imprisonment?
No, because at the time, people in Seychelles, you got to understand the situation in the Seychelles at the time. It was very difficult to communicate with anybody. You have to write a letter, and then you had to get through the post office, the censorship, and people, when it gets there is a different issue. Then, but the communication wasn't as
the postmaster swap it over. We're very happy in Seychelles. The conditions are great. But I mean, your father's asylum application, we might be able to access that. I think we need your permission. Is that correct, Desiree? Do we need permission to access an asylum application to the UK? You have to request it. Okay, so apparently you could request that. All right. The investigator will send you the link where you could request the asylum application. That would be sufficient for us to corroborate everything that's basically said in your case, the asylum application. So, yeah. Is there... Sorry. Yeah, we will speak to other people that are in the ministry, but once we get the file, that will give us a fairly clear idea of what's going on. In terms of outcome in your case, what were you hoping for at the end of the day?
Well, we're hoping for the return of the land, because the land belongs to the heirs. And we've got now 2 parcels, which is split. There is a building that has been built at the front, but the parcel at the back is isolated. But if anything, if that's not possible, then we need an equivalent piece of land in an area situated where very similar to the one that's been taken, not on top of a mountain in a forest, or a very diminutive piece of land which does not actually correspond to what was taken. Because basically what the state is doing is saying, well, I'll give you whatever bit you want. But that's not what the Constitution actually says. And I think one of the issues that we have is that the government actually does not take seriously its obligation under the Constitution. And the reason it does that, I believe, is because there is no monitoring officer who is the guardian of the Constitution. And there is a conflict of interest that arises in the Attorney General's office, where part of that department is advising the Lands Department how to circumvent the Constitution, and part of it is dealing with other stuff. So what I would have expected the government to set up a special statutory body that would deal with these claims and deal with it quickly, because the longer it drags on, because this thing about land rights, it's an emotive issue with people around the world. We all need to look at places like Bosnia-Herzegovina, in the Balkans. Was basically around part of it land issues. These feuds still remains in places like Italy. And we need to resolve it in the Seychelles, because otherwise you drag on for years and years to come, generation and generation. Plus also, it's a financial burden on the state, because the state is liable for compensation running into the millions. And it doesn't do the finances of the state any good to have this, and its credit rating any good to have this hanging on its head.
Yes, well, they did set up the Lands Tribunal that was meant to deal with, I think they set that up in 2018, was it? The Lands Tribunal? 18, I think they set that up, and they're meant to be trying to get through these cases after, I think, the Court of Appeal recommended the government do it. So they are trying, I understand, now. But, we have time will tell, but hopefully it's a short amount of time that we will really see progress. That's what we hope for, for people like you that, and your family that have suffered for many, many years for no reason, really. No reason. But I have to thank you for the way that you presented your case to us. It's really nice. I feel like I wish we could have you come and work with us. We need some help. And you did it so nicely. One of the best presented cases with your documents and your exhibits. It was a joy. So we're very grateful to you for that. And hope the other people.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I wish I could, because obviously I'm stuck here in the UK. I've got a permanent job here, but if you need help, you can always ask me for it, and I'm conflicted on this, but I'll be happy to lend you my help.
Yeah, that's very kind. But the conflict, I think, yes, we'd probably have to get you to withdraw your case. No. To avoid that conflict. But it's been a pleasure. So I really, really appreciate the way you've set out your complaint. We have no further questions unless there's something else you'd like to add.
Yes, there's 2 points which I wanted to make to piece of evidence. And that's around the coup d'etat. At the time of the coup d'etat, I was employed as a Met observer at the airport. And the Met office is actually situated underneath the control tower. And you had quite a good view of the apron at the front of the building. Then on the right-hand side, you could actually see the runway all the way down to South East Island, and then the fire brigade, and then the airport generator, emergency generator there. And then on the left-hand side, you could actually see all the way down to the terminals. And between the terminals and the Met office, there was an old hut. And next to that hut was parked a Cessna 125 aeroplane that was used by the Aero Club. So I went to work. I think it must have been this. We used to work shifts, and the shift worked morning, afternoon, and then nights. So I went to work. I think it must have been either the 6th or the 7th, and so it was more or less immediately after the coup. And when I got to the office, there were a couple of people sitting there with, one of them was Will Marengo, who's the brother of MacDonald Marengo, and there was somebody else, and they both had automatic rifles. They were just sitting outside. So I went inside, and there was, at the time, an English forecaster, meteorologist. And he said to me, so the apron at that time was blocked by an assortment of airport vehicles. And he said to me, oh, there's a plane coming at 3 o'clock. And I thought, what's this? And he said, it's a very old plane. It's a DC-4, and you're never going to see it again because it's it's being phased out of service. So it's a classic plane, and if you're interested in plane, have a look at it. And about 3 o'clock, so I saw a car drew up, and in it was Ogilvy Bailey with MacDonald Marengo sitting at the front. And I knew both of them because they were inhabitants of Lake Anel. In fact, MacDonald Marengo, I think I've had a few chats with him before, and he told me a few months before the coup d'etat, I mean, I didn't know it at the time, that he'd been on a visit to Tanzania in Arusha. So, but I didn't know what he'd gone there for. He told me it was just a visit. So when the car got to where the aeroplane was, the Cessna 125, the car stopped, and MacDonald Marengo came out with an AK-47 and hid behind the plane. And then Ogilvy Bailey drove on towards the terminal. And then a few minutes later, this plane arrived, and it was indeed a DC-4. but it was from an Air Comoros plane. So I was intrigued by it because at the time, the Comore was embroiled in coup d'etats and so on, and there was all sorts of issues going on. We knew it was under French control. So the plane came in and taxied up to the terminal. And then McDonald-Marigot ran and hid underneath the belly of the plane. And then they brought in the stairs, and Ogilvy Bellery went up the stairs, and I could see some white people coming to the entrance, and they all went inside. And then the plane stayed there. I didn't see anyone come out. I think they must have come out, but because I didn't stay to watch it all the time. But the plane was still there when I left, when I finished my shift. So that's the evidence I wanted to point out to the commission. But the other thing is that I think the plane came from Comore, whether it was from Anjouan or Mayotte, I can't remember. But
you're saying Louis went onto the plane?
Yes.
Went inside the plane where there were these people?
Yes.
But they didn't get off the plane?
I didn't see them get off.
So it was like they were having a meeting in there?
I think so.
Okay.
That's fascinating, right? We'd like to find out more about that.
Well, the flight records should be able to tell you at that time that there was an Air Comoros. It was unusual because I hadn't seen I didn't even know that Air Comoros had any airlines. But it was Air Comoros. It was white with red stripes along the side.
Thank you very much for sharing that. We will investigate that. Investigator, I'm looking at you, right? Yeah, thank you. That's very interesting, fascinating. That's the first time we've heard that, so we'll be interested to follow that up. And the second thing? Did you have two things?
Well, the second thing was that what McDonald-Marigot had told me, that he'd gone off to Arusha on a visit. But what was odd about this was that he used to come down to, on the other side of where we used to live, there was a shop belonging to the Alibi brothers. And at the front of the shop was an open veranda. And then you could walk on either side to go towards the beach. And in the evening at about 5 o'clock, people would gather there from work before they go home because there was nothing else to do, having a little chat, maybe having a beer. And I used to go there and to talk to people. So it was one of these conversations where he mentioned that. And then the last time I saw him, he was quite well dressed because he was somebody that I considered to be quite poor because he was a painter by trade, a decorator, and he wasn't someone who was making quite a lot of money. He used to come and fish down in the bay, he suddenly said to everybody, he said, "I'm leaving. I'm going," and I expected him to go either south towards Victoria or north towards Le Canal, because that's where he lived. And instead, he went towards the back of the building, towards the beach. So I followed him to see what he was up to. And he got to the beach. He waited there for some time. And then this speedboat came, it was quite a small speedboat. Well, I remember thinking about it at the time. I thought there's quite a lot of men in it. There must have been about 10 people. I didn't know them or who they were. He came to the beach and he climbed on, and they were making jokes amongst themselves. And then the boat reversed and then went off into the distance. And then, of course, a few weeks later, the coup d'etat happened.
It's very interesting history in Seychelles. Right. It's unbelievable, to be quite honest, all these events, what people are up to. But thank you very much again. Thank you for sharing with us. Thank you for also sharing these last two pieces with us. We appreciate it. So we will let you know when Pat LeBlash is going to address your case. And we will follow up. We might look and see about the state security harassing your family as well. Sometimes people cooperate and say, yeah, I did that. So we'll follow up on that. And the investigator will send you the link where you can request the asylum application of your father, because that would be useful for us. But thank you very much again. Pleasure to meet you. Congratulations on building such a wonderful life for yourself outside Seychelles.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So we will adjourn now. And tomorrow we're going to be in closed session all day until 3 o'clock. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.